Next, House Bill 349.
So I asked Melissa if she wanted to put this on the agenda, and she said she did. So I would like to lead off a little bit. It's a bit frustrating when I hear statements being made that aren't true. So one of which is, our Bridgewater Hebron students don't do well at the middle school. So I just want to state that I think Ann did a great job proving out that we work with facts and evidence. So there's no evidence to show that they're not doing well there. And that they would be better off in a K-8 building. I just want to point out what our middle school has to offer and how difficult that might be to replicate that in a K-8 building. So we have soccer for boys and girls, cross-country running, football, field hockey, volleyball, basketball for boys and girls, unified basketball, ski team and spirit, baseball, softball, track and field. And those are great programs. Within our co-curricular programs, the drama club and the student staff senate, the student council, yearbook, jazz band, select choir, and the ski program. Our allied arts, I think, are just great. Band and chorus, and our students who are in the band get individual instrumental lessons. Technical education, health, French and Spanish, physical education, computers, and art. So when you look at the enrollments in Bridgewater, in Hebron, and it's, the building committee has already voted to include all of Alexandria in their calculations. So when you remove them and you remove the preschool, because that's the Newfound preschool, you're down to about 68 students. And if you were to make it 7 through 8 and use about that ratio, you would have a school of about 108 students, K-8. So it's hard to imagine with a school of that size that you would have enough, the scale to provide all the programs that I just announced. One of the other, so there's assumptions being made we talked about. So there was one that, one of the first assumptions is that Newfound would tuition Alexandria kids back to Bridgewater Hebron, and I think that's probably already been, dismissed by what the building committee is planning to do. Another is that they would become their own SAU, but we would do their SAU work for them. Well, I would say that based on, the potential of Hill coming in, and it's almost Robin and I were looking at it today, it's almost an even swap as far as the number of students and the amount of work. So it would be difficult to see that we could have, keep Bridgewater Hebron and Hill at the same time. But to look at the services, in an SAU office, the superintendent, the business administrator, the special education administration, curriculum administrator, facilities, IT administration, human resources, accounts payable, data entry, payroll, our behavior specialist, our social worker. So to start up an SAU office is quite a task. And then we also have more special services that we provide our students: occupational therapy, physical therapy, speech and language therapy. We have autism specialists. So there are really a lot of work to do to establish an SAU office. And I know that I've been reaching out to superintendents. There are a lot of small districts like Bridgewater that have been established for many years, and they have a part-time superintendent. And I asked them, how does that work there? And they say it's a challenge finding staff because you don't really have enough work for it to be a full-time position. So and it's hard. One of the soups said, it's really hard to find qualified full-time people, and then to make it part-time is even more difficult. And then they have a lot of turnover and things like that. So there are challenges staffing those types of offices. So these are some of the difficulties with that. So I encourage the board to get involved, and I asked Melissa to put it on the agenda, so if the board wants to discuss it.
Wouldn't it ultimately be the decision of the school board whether to tuition Alexandria or to accept
Yeah.
the potential Bridgewater Hebron brought in 9 through 12 into the Newfound district.
That's correct. Yeah, that's correct. All those, and including the SAU part.
Yep.
Yeah, that's all up to the board to decide.
Yes.
Thank you. You know, there probably isn't anyone in this room that has more legislative experience and knowing how legislation moves forward. I had told Pierre last week that I thought it probably was gonna pass because it went before the Education Committee and the prime sponsor and co-sponsor were the head people on the Education Committee, the chair and the vice chair. It's really hard for a committee to vote against their leadership on one of the bills that they sponsored. It also is a bill that they could rightly say, well, no harm done. It doesn't do anything. It just is enabling legislation, so let's move it along. And it's gonna go to the Senate, and the same thing's gonna happen. The chairman and vice chairman of the Senate are the prime sponsors of the bill. So, is it gonna just get moved along? What does it harm? Well, what it harms, if you read the bill, it says the selectmen would have up to 4 years to call for a special town meeting before we even know if the town really has any interest at all in this happening, other than a handful of individuals who manipulated this being introduced. I know those 4 sponsors and co-sponsors didn't wake up one morning going, I'm gonna put in a bill to separate 3 towns out of SAU 4. They were specifically asked, and as a former legislator for many years, you tend to put in a bill when a constituent asks you to. You don't have any real personal drive for it. So I can see this moving along. It is unfair to the students in those 3 towns. It is unfair to the staff in those 3 towns. It's unfair for the taxpayers, for them to be in limbo for 4 years, up to 4 years, could be closer to 5 by the time it's called for and the vote's taken and it would take effect. So I think the smartest thing that we should do as a board is to take a position and ask the Senate to amend the bill that was sent to it by the House. House is 400 members. It's really hard to make changes when you're trying to deal with 400 people. The Senate is 24 people. I think we should ask them to direct the selectmen, not to take up to 4 years, but to take it up by September of this year. That gives them from now until then to hold public hearings and collect information. You ask these people direct questions and they don't have the answers to practically anything. Anything. So I think it's important for their people to be educated on what's being proposed, how it would impact them, what the cost would be. I hear those towns are going to save a lot of money. I'm also concerned that we're being told that there's 2 main reasons why they want this legislation. And who they is, I don't know if that's 12 people that got together and decided, gee, this would be peachy keen. They say that they like the idea of a 1 through 8 concept, having their kids have to be moved around less. That's the whole reason that they built the school to begin with, because they didn't want their kids to be bused that far. So that would put them out of step with the configuration of the rest of the community schools in our district. I don't know that they've ever proposed taking their kids back for all 8th grades and still stay within SAU 4. So that's the one big argument. And you're dealing with about 40 kids that are in 6th, 7th, and 8th grade. And that's probably going down. Our enrollment is going to continue to decline over the next 8 years. And the second reason is we don't have enough say. Well, we've got 7 members of this board. And we've got 1, 2, 3 members from those 3 towns. Those 3 towns have 15% of the student population. and they have 3 representatives. The 85% only has 4. And they don't have enough say? So it just doesn't add up. And I think it's critical that we get a real feel as soon as possible from the citizens, the parents, the taxpayers, of which way they want to go. We've started pulling together numbers of the financial impact, even though it's a kind of like a moving target. If Hill comes in, it's this. If this one comes in, it's that. But that needs to be done sooner than later. I don't care if those 3 towns decide that they want to leave. That's fine. But what is unfair is us being in limbo, particularly when we're in a period where we've been serious about looking at needs and building infrastructure. Are we going to be looking at our enrollment needs for 4 towns or for 7 towns? Or maybe 5 towns, depending on what hill. We don't have 4 years. There's the possibility, we have aging buildings. We have one particularly aging building that happens to be one of the larger buildings that has serious environmental issues. We don't have 4 years to wait. We've been pushing it off for too many years. And I don't know if that means consolidation, if that doesn't mean just tweaking some changes, or if it means building something new. That hasn't been determined yet, but we need hard facts to move forward. And I think as a board, we should take a position. The only question with us taking a position, do we take a position of 7 towns, or do we say 3 towns really have a conflict in this, and should they be voting on it? That's the kind of division.
Right, I'm just confused. I'm pulled up the RSA, the House Bill 349, because I'm confused that I don't, maybe it's my misunderstanding, and now I just lost it again, is that they're supposed to be voting this year. I don't see something about 4 years.
The last line, that the selectmen have up to 4 years to call for a vote.
Well, but at the beginning, it says,
Contradictory.
right, at the beginning, it says, the creation of this new public school district shall be contingent upon a majority vote in each of the 3 towns at their 2023 annual meeting, or such other meeting as is determined by the 3 towns under this act, adopting the provisions of this act, whereupon the effective operational date of this district shall be the 1st of July of the fiscal year subsequent to the adoption vote, unless the annual meeting specifies a later fiscal year to be the effective operational date. To me, that means you vote in May, you say we're pulling out, by July 1st next year, you're gone, peace out.
And that's what my
Maybe that's
initial
my-
interpretation was. But then when you get to that last
Get
sentence,
deeper into it.
Right,
they
that
can wait
last.
4 years to calling for the
However,
actual
if the
vote.
select boards of the 3 towns wish to proceed further with this legislation, they shall, within 4 years from the effective date of this act, warn the question of adoption of this act at an annual meeting of the legal voters residing in the towns to see if they will vote to adopt the provisions of this act and create the new school district. They shall call the meeting and give notice as town meetings are called and warned, accepting, that the warrant shall be posted at 2 or more public places in each of the towns comprising the proposed district. But like I said, in the first, if this passes the way it is, they have to do it at their 2023 annual meeting. It states that in the law.
Unless they determine that they want it at a different date.
Right. Right, it's not yet, but I'm just saying, like,
If they meet before July 1st, whatever they decide, if they decided they wanted to leave, then 1 year from July 1st is when everything severs. So that means if in 2023, they take a vote at any time, then at July 1st of 24 would start the 1 year. So that means everything would be severed July 1st of 2025. Unless the selectmen don't bother calling a meeting until they feel like calling it up to 4 years from now. And then the first section only triggers once that vote is taken, whenever they call it.
But then the first section's null and void if it's 2023 and they don't call anything till 2025. They're already not following the rule.
But in that
That's
sentence,
just my
they-
interpretation.
They
but-
said, or a subsequent date that they choose.
Now, is this for the towns themselves or the Bridgewater Hebron Village Commission? Are they holding a vote
No,
or the individual towns?
Each of the three towns have to pass it. If one
Regardless of
doesn't,
what the commission says.
right, if they get a failed vote in one of the towns, then it would not happen, that's my
Because
understanding.
there's no Groton rep to the Bridgewater Hebron Village Commission, correct?
The
No,
commission has no vote, nothing, they're
no
managers.
representation in
Okay.
that.
And I keep hearing that people from those three towns, a lot of them don't even know that this is happening. So somebody's got to step up and force the hand of, you're doing it or you're not doing it, but please let us know sooner than later. It's unfair.
I think what's really hard, and I said at the last meeting, is trying to wrap your head around not having any details behind it. You ask, well, what does that mean if you have kiddos, you know, and it was made very clear to me, it is up to 4 years. That does not mean we are going to take the 4 years. That means we have up to the 4 years. We could fast track it, we could, you know, there's lots, the unknown leaves a lot of room for rumor, for interpretation, for assumptions, for whatever you want to come up with. But you ask, so what does that mean if I have a ninth grader at that time? Does that mean their sophomore year, Newfound chooses not to, you know, that's not part of the tuition? Can I personally pay, like, for them to stay in their school? Does that mean they have to go what about busing? What about athletics? What about, you know, all of the other pieces that come, and it's, well, we don't know yet. We don't know yet. So is there anything stopping those conversations from starting before it passes, aside from potential of time weeks? Like, I'm thinking about the Hill and negotiating and when that's starting to, you know, why hasn't that been started? Like, pencil to paper, here's some rough costs, here's some rough ideas, here's, you know, a grandfathered group where if they're, at this point, they're gonna stay till the end, you know, or, there's just so much unknown that I don't know how you expect families to begin to even be like, yeah, this is a great idea, or no, this is a terrible idea, because you don't know anything more than, well, it might happen.
And it all depends on SAU 4, the vote, the 4 members that are left, I assume. And that changes. I mean, we know we're getting a new member tomorrow, we may get 2 new members tomorrow, and a year from now, there'd be 2 other members. So this could be an ever-changing, you know, I personally, if I was here and the vote had to come of tuitioning the high school kids to Newfound, I might not want to tuition them in the future, but any kid who's already started high school, it would be terribly unjust to sever them being able to continue on with their high school class. You know, that's my personal feeling at this point.
But these are the
Those are
things,
decisions that have got to be
Right.
made.
and I think that's the hardest, and that's what's creating so many rumor mills, is you could talk to somebody in Hebron, talk to someone in Bridgewater, you're getting some different information because there are no facts. You know, there is the frequently asked questions, and there's and that information is helpful, but nothing in it spells out any sort of details of what this would begin to look like. And I asked what would happen to the preschool. I asked about adding on and how long that would take to get the building up to what it would need to add on the extra grades. I asked about busing for sporting events. So if my kid's in Bridgewater in 8th grade, but they've got a middle school sporting event, they have to be there for 1 o'clock. Are you gonna send a bus to Bridgewater Hebron for the 9 kids that need to get to the middle school? Well, that might fall on the parent. Like, those are things that, just the small details, that's not even the big stuff that's yet to be figured out.
So we've been, Robin and I spent a lot of time today trying to, because I agree with everything you're saying. And I really feel, like, I still am the superintendent for those students and parents in those 3 towns. So, I mean, I don't think it's a good thing, House Bill 349, because for all the reasons you're saying, and I think it'll limit opportunities for students. As I testified in Concord, I, went back to the original intent of cooperative districts was to share expenses and to create greater opportunities for students. The moment you become a smaller district, you're gonna limit opportunities, and you limit guarantee. Right now, everybody in those 3 towns have a guarantee as to which schools they go to, and there may not be that guarantee going forward. But so one of the things I've done is I've placed phone calls to similar sized districts that have, as Bridgewater Hebron would be in Groton, and what their SAU expenses are, to try to get a handle on that. So I've got one that responded to me already, and they say, well, we spend about $400,000 on our SAU office. This is a district with about 100 students, so very similar. So looking at what their share of our expenses is, here they pay about $182,000 of that. So it'd be about double. That's just one example. I gave you the long list of offerings we have at our middle school. How do they match that? So, I think I'd be very confident in saying that if this was to go into play, there would be a much greater expense to the taxpayers. And I don't understand why people would want to enter that we don't even know what the end product would be like, what that school would be like. We get criticized repeatedly about our budget and our cost per pupil and all these things at our budget committee. So this would drive the cost per pupil when you have 12 students in a classroom. It's a simple math problem to figure out the cost per pupil. That your cost per pupil is going to be very high there. So we're going to try to help as much as we can, Britta, with that, because I feel like part of my duty is to try to inform the parents as to what this all means, because I agree, you're not getting that as much as we can. We can't speculate as to what kind of programming they're going to have and things in the building. But
what it also does, it's very awkward for the staff, because what job security is there? And unless they somehow become part of our SAU, are they going to negotiate teachers' contracts? Or are they going to want us as an SAU to have a 2-tier negotiation for teachers, the teachers that are us and the teachers that are them? And what if they decide that they want a different package? Or what if they're in a different insurance plan and they're a very little drop in the bucket versus rates that we could get as a larger? It just opens up so many questions.
there's a lot of questions, and it's been horrible for the staff there. It's second year in a row. So for 2 years in a row, the school has gone through this with the funding formula issue, and there were, comments made to staff members about different ways they should vote and all this other stuff. And then now again this year, so that's not good for learning, because that does trickle down into the classroom, unfortunately. And it's not the teacher's fault, and that's another part of this that you need to consider. That has really created a lot of turmoil, a lot of anxiety within the building.
I just think hard facts would really help across the board.
I think right now the hard facts that we have, unfortunately, and I think that's what's frustrating everybody, is we do have hard facts. We have the fact that it's going up for a vote. We think that it's likely going to pass unless we can decipher the approach that Fran talked about and trying to, get into the Senate, the 24 people, and have them, restrict this 4-year, probably gonna pass, whether we can change it or not. Let's just assume it's going to pass without the change to the 4 years, right? And that's, all right, then we're there. Then, all it is a possibility that something might happen. It gives an option. We have no idea I think what's happening here is we're lobbying, we're ahead of ourselves, it's passed, and we're trying to convince people why it's good or bad and what should happen. We don't know that yet. They don't know that yet. Nobody knows that yet. It's unfortunate, but you can only tackle things step by step, right? So a lot of what we're talking about right now, we can talk about it all day long, but we're not going to get anywhere around it. What we should be thinking about is, let's assume it passes, okay, and then how do we have a dialogue around what happens at that point? Because that's all we can do. Those are the only facts that I'm aware of, unless anybody else has. There's no plan to definitely do this. It's an option, and I think what I would have included as to why we're here right now, which wasn't included earlier in the summary, which is because of the formula that was just mentioned. There's absolutely, I think it's the number one reason why we're here right now. There was a change from an uncontrolled situation, if you're in those towns, from another town, Alexandria, okay, which caused a vote around, which caused a lot of emotion and turmoil for people that have worked really hard about creating that school, the system that they have there. So let's not forget that. That just happened. I think in response to that, here we are. So there's gonna be an option for that school, the people that work in that school system, to, and I don't know that they plan to do anything with it. They may or may not. We don't know that. So to talk about, we don't know the scenarios. I think that's gonna be a dialogue that it may not pass. I don't think it's, like you mentioned a minute ago, I think it is going to pass, given the support that it has. I don't see it not passing. I think we should be thinking, all right, let's assume it passes, then what's the best next step for us to, to take? And one of those things might be that nothing happens. That's a potential option. And I think it's a realistic potential option.
Without anything on the table from, I guess you'd say, the towns, there's nothing to look at right now. And I think that is a hard thing, because the unknowns are very hard. And it's hard to think about without anything on paper. So again, we're kind of trapped in that waiting to see thing. And what does happen if it does pass? Are we gonna set up a committee to study it or look at it? And I mean, we can't do that now because we don't know if it passed, but, or would this be just a dialogue that's open on the agenda every meeting?
According to the legislature, if they vote in the positive, it's not in our hands to vote or
No.
have a study committee. You will be dissolved.
Yeah, I guess the study committee is the wrong term, but I mean, we'd still be here for the interim, at least us three representatives, and
What do you mean? So when you say, you mean after the votes of the three towns?
pass, yeah, after the
Right.
votes of three
Assuming,
towns.
so assuming
So
this
that's
passes,
assuming that
and then
even gets
assuming
to
that happens.
that.
So I think before that, what we should be doing right now is reaching out and having constructive dialogue and conversations around this
Yeah.
in a constructive way.
That's why amending it would force that to happen sooner than
What
leave
do you
it
think
dragging
the odds
for
are of
4 years.
amending it, though?
Simple.
No, I mean, do you think
In
that,
committee, that if it's explained right to them, we don't care if they stay or go, but it's unfair to keep everybody in limbo for up to 4 years. You need to shorten that. I mean, we really don't know if this is a handful of people or if this is broad community support.
that's not, I'm asking about amending that with the 24 members of Senate is what you're talking about,
Mhm.
correct? So we're not talking about the towns, we're talking about,
Right.
I'm asking you
And the legislation directs the town, so if that is amended to direct the selectmen, not to have up to 4 years, but to do this by September of this year, have public hearings, and then have a special town meeting and a vote. And if that doesn't work, the second step would be a petition to the selectmen to hold a special town meeting to have that vote sooner than later. I mean, if I was a member of those communities, I'd be livid that all this was being upheaval to my life without me knowing who's behind it or if there really is any broad support.
I agree with Fran that shortening the time frame would alleviate a lot of stressors with the potential of Hill joining the district, with the prescribed RSA 195 rules that limit the study committees to, I believe it's 180 days. The 4-year period that they could wait and kind of like just end up being a dark cloud over the whole school district, because we can't make any strategic decisions if next year they're gonna hold a vote and then it upends everything that we've been planning for. So I think shortening that time frame would, if we can get that done in the Senate, would be a really prudent thing to do. There are prescribed rules. RSA 195 tells you how you're supposed to do it, and I know that in some of the testimony at the first hearing, it was said, well, we're doing this legislation because it didn't work last time. So they tried with the 180 days. Let's give them another 180 days if we can get the Senate to amend the bill and see if.
I don't think they've gone that way.
So I don't.
They
They
had
did in
Alexandria.
2014.
Yeah, I mean, that
Yeah.
was a decade ago.
Right, so.
Right.
From us reading, like, I don't, just to be honest, like, right now, if we're, more we talk, I don't even know that we completely know what we're talking about. We're reading it off phones, and we're saying it's at the end, and it's at the beginning, so I don't even know that we exactly fully understand this, what we're talking about
I
right now.
fully understand it.
No, It is
Well,
4 years.
Okay, but I
But
heard,
in-
I heard
I-
different things, and we're reading it off a phone. I'm
Right,
just-
because
right?
I'm rereading the language, so I'm portraying the language
It didn't
correctly.
come off to me as like we were fully clear, and I think that's not a crazy thing for me to say.
It is-
At all. All right, and so secondly, is I still wanna understand what Fran brought up, because now we're talking about that. What is the process? Let's assume that's correct. What is the process? Because you were asking, like, we as a board should take a vote or not take a vote, or is there conflict of interest? Like, what's the process to change this time frame with the Senate? What does that look like? Because we're talking about it, but do we know what it looks
It
like?
talks about somebody going and suggesting that amendment as an
When?
individual
When?
or
Like, when does that have to happen?
within the next month, when the Senate takes it up. Crossover is the middle of April. That's when the Senate will probably start taking up House bills. Unless they're done with all of their bills, they could take it up right away. We could find out that next week they're taking up this issue. So it's much stronger if this request came from the board and not from an individual. And we're in a position right now that we only have 6 members because Heidi isn't here tonight. So think carefully of what motion you make, if any.
Kim, do you have any other?
Just one question, do any of the 3 towns, do they know, is the question on the warrant for this year?
Oh,
No.
I don't know about their warrant. I don't
So they're saying no, so it's not on the warrant for this year, so.
It could possibly be in Hebron's because they don't meet until May, right, their town meeting?
That's true.
That's correct.
But how do you have it on one town and then have to wait till?
Because they're not SB2, they haven't.
No, but what I'm
they-
saying is, how do you have one town vote on it in May, and then have the others have to wait till the next March, unless they hold a special meeting?
They could, the other 2 towns could hold a special meeting on the second Tuesday in May because one of them is already having an officially called warranted meeting. And they could, that would only give them until May to have public hearings in those 3 towns and to collect data and answer information. For example, I understand that nobody has talked to the principal of Plymouth. What if they have no interest in tuition into Plymouth? And what if the Newfound board says, you know, with Hill coming in and space needs, maybe it's just better that we not tuition those kids into our school. Then where do they go? They create their own high school, they create a charter school, they private tuition them to the New Hampton school, at whatever it costs that is.
Again, now I feel like we're 2 to 3 steps ahead of ourselves here. I don't see the value in it. I'm not voting for anything that I have this level of information about, lack of knowledge about, at all. Like, I feel not prepared at all to be able to make a vote on this personally.
So that answers the question.
I mean, I think the first thing would be, because I think as a school boards association would be a value to us, but we need to know as a board where we stand, whether we support or don't support House Bill 349. I think that's, personally, I think, you know, I can't call a school boards association and be like, hey, can you help us out with supporting us in not supporting this or trying to amend it this or that. So I think the first thing we need to know, I personally would like to make a motion to see who to support or not support House Bill 349. I think that is in of itself the first step, and then we can find more answers. I think as a board, I don't want to reach out and have a personal opinion because you have to be very, very careful to the School Boards Association. I think to put a motion on the floor of whether you support or don't support House Bill 349 is the first step. Personally, that's my personal motion on the floor.
as a representative of one of those towns, I find it really hard to support it or not support it, not having any, and I'm not asking for hard figures. And, you know, since our last meeting, I've had great conversations, you know, and I've gotten some good information, and people are willing to talk. You know, it's been asked about, you know, call and have it put on the select board meeting. We can have some conversation, but I don't know that that would be beneficial without any sort of details to get, because that's the amount of parents I talk to, that's what they want, is something, you know, and I think you have to have some empathy for parents that are in that limbo, that want to know, either I need to prepare for something more, or, you know, something different, or I need to just kind of ride it out because my kid's in kindergarten and I've got a lot of time before, you know, changes would really impact them. But that these are some really big things for parents to try to swallow and wrap their heads around with no detail. And I know you're saying we're putting the cart before the horse, and that's fine, but I think some form of something has to kind of either, yes, we've talked to Plymouth, yes, it is hard fact that they are willing to negotiate with us. Yes, we have talked to, you know, Pierre and Robin and the board and about taking care of those services. Yet, like, there has been no details at all even put down, aside from we know there's a lot behind it.
I think the only thing that we know is that we give an option. I don't think there's any other details that have been ironed out that I've heard at all. Nothing.
Right, and that's what I'm
You
saying,
know what I
that's
mean?
what's
Like,
really hard
unfortunately,
is.
and I don't think there's going to be. So therefore, you'd have to, like, I'm with you, I'm not gonna vote without any information, you know what I mean? I can't. I just abstain. I don't think it's appropriate, quite frankly. I think this is a massive disconnect in terms of level of knowledge about what we're even voting on, quite frankly. But yeah.
But I think you gotta take it a little simpler than that. I think it's about whether you think the district should be split up. That's what, to me, if I was on the board, I would be voting on tonight. Like, do I agree? I mean, you have 3 towns, well, some people from the 3 towns who wanna leave Newfound. That's the question. I mean, whatever, however you wanna talk about all the other stuff, but that's the question. Like, do you agree with that? Or do you wanna keep Newfound together?
But I disagree that that's the question. I think that there's a viable option that even if this passes, it doesn't happen. That's a viable option. Now, you could say, then why are they doing it? And I think there's reasons for that. They have an option, and I already mentioned, I think, why. But I do think that it's a viable option that if this were to happen, that nothing happens with the SAU, with that school. That's a potential option. I don't think anybody can say that that isn't a potential option.
I would have to say, I think we owe it to the teachers in Bridgewater Hebron, because I've had multiple teachers and staff from that school reaching out, not knowing whether they want to sign their contracts for the next school year.
Yeah, but owe them what? Because I'm not disagreeing
Whether
with
we,
you, but
whether
they
we.
don't know.
Ken, you asked me a question, I'm gonna try to finish.
I'm just saying.
Whether we support the teachers or not, and that we're trying to keep the district together. I think we as a board kind of owe that to the staff, because I have had multiple staff, from paraprofessionals to teachers, et cetera, say to me, I don't know whether to sign my contract for next year, because I don't wanna deal with this. And that's not fair for them as well. I'm just thinking about the big picture, because there's the devil's in the details, and I get it, we don't have enough information, but we need to also show support for our employees. I feel that we need to show support and some support to them, personally.
We would be asking for an amendment that would quicken the direction that they're going in. And if they can't get their act together and come up with facts and figures, say by September, then that's their fault, not ours.
And now we're talking about 2 different things. We're talking about if we support it, and then we're talking about if we're gonna do the amendment. Those are 2 different things.
There's a motion right now to have a vote, so
Yeah.
you haven't got a
Right.
second.
We're not on that yet.
Great. I put a motion out to vote whether to support or not support House Bill 349.
I can't support that without an amendment. I cannot put this district in limbo for 4 years. I don't mind if they do it, but they needed to do it in a timely fashion.
Then there's no second to the motion, so then the motion dies. Yes, Britta?
Would it be beneficial to see if they're, like, to see whom supported or kind of put this together, to have a conversation with like the parties in the room to say, here's our, we all wanna work together. These are all, so whether you say, we're not interested in your kids, but these are Newfound kids. They're not Bridgewater, Hebron, Groton kids. They're not Bristol, Danbury, New Hampton, Alexandria, Hill. These are Newfound kids, and that's why we've been on these boards. That's why we're here. No matter if they're in preschool or they're seniors, they're still Newfound kids. So would it be beneficial to get all of the, or the parties that we could get together and have a meeting and talk about these things, saying, here's what I'm hearing, here's what I'm feeling, here's what you're hearing. Let's talk everybody together versus me going to Groton, you going to Hebron, you in Alexandria. Let's talk and have a conversation and see where the fallout's lying to either say, yeah, I support this, or, geez, I really can't support this with what I know right now.
I agree 100%. We have to do that
Go.
sooner than
Let's
later,
go.
because even if it passes, it'd be better to have started that dialogue than to wait. So I think that's the only approach that you just described. The best and only approach right now. I agree.
It should have been, it happened before the
Right.
legislation was submitted to the House, those kinds of conversations.
And no local reps asked to be part of it.
But I think it's a good idea to see if we can, we don't know a timeline, we don't even know when the Senate is gonna be taking up this bill now, or when it goes to the House for it, cause it's just gonna be on a consent agenda for the full House.
Right, so there's no way that it's gonna be killed on the House calendar. No way. So then it's just the time it takes to go to the Senate.
So
We
we
probably got 2 or 3 weeks. The selectmen can get together and meet and give us an indication. But they've done no presentation to us. But we need to come up with a mechanism to shorten that window, and we can only do that, I believe, by amending that bill.
And I don't know that I'm asking for a presentation, but conversation. And I don't know how we go about getting that.
Well,
It would
set the
definitely be
agenda,
beneficial
we set
to
the
everyone.
agenda, we can invite some of their rep people to this next board meeting.
We kind of talked about it at the
I
last.
can, I can make
Right.
send an invitation, see if
We
they
talked
want-
about this because there was a lack of understanding when we were throwing things around, and we discussed having a session where we could better understand as opposed to just kind of throwing numbers around. And the $1 rent was a good example that everyone can resonates with. So I think we really, it's long overdue to do this. We have to do it, I think. I think it's gonna pass, and we're gonna be, no matter how much none of us like it, we're gonna be in the situation that we wanna have started these dialogues yesterday.
But it's not our fault, this board's fault.
I'm not
that
saying it's
those
anyone's fault.
dialogues
We
weren't
don't
done.
need a point blame, we need to say, what
Yeah,
can we do
let's-
from
what can
here?
we do?
Can we get together, have a conversation, have some healthy back and forth, so we're all on the same page? Because I believe, and the more people I talk to, there are pockets of information, depending on where you're going and getting your information from. Outside of, there's a frequently asked question, I think Eric, had you sent it to everybody? Eric, is it Eric Piper?
The
Yeah.
email he
It's
sent
on,
to
yeah,
it's on their website.
Yeah, so there is some information that's consistent there, but we need to be able to talk it through together.
Information without real detail is what we got, pretty much.
Well, we can do that. I mean, I can reach out and ask and invite them to the next board.
And I think it would help the divide, because right now it's us, that we don't know who us is, and it's them. And
We don't
some
even
days
know
I don't
who
know
they
who them is either. But we, if we can kind of say, hey, we do want to work together. We want this to work for everybody involved.
The kids, I want it to work for the students, like you said, they're all Newfound kids. That's my number
Okay,
one.
well, if that's what you want, I'll do it. I'll send an invitation.
That in and of itself should be communicated to the concerns that were talked about with staff and so forth, and that, hey, we are getting, we are doing, as opposed to a vacuum of nothing happening. You can at least say, we're having meetings, we're having discussion, you know what I mean? It's something that's happening. As opposed to answers that unfortunately aren't gonna be answered, which,
They'll be applying for jobs very soon, so.
it's not, well, I mean, they're not, without
not
that
quick
happening,
enough.
there's no answers, regardless of how much we want them.
The best way to move it forward is to support the bill. You can't put an amendment into a bill that you don't support. So you have to support the bill going forward. And if truly, I'm convinced that the majority of people in those communities would prefer to not be in SAU 4, fine. My preference is that we all make nice and we move together united for what's in the best interest of all of us. But we don't have that luxury. But bringing it to a head sooner than later is the way to go, and the only way we do that is by supporting the bill with the requirement that it be amended. And you can easily make that motion. We support the legislation with an amendment to accomplish this. That's the way how it's done.
Anybody else have anything? Okay. Any other motions before I move on from House Bill 349? Seeing none.